thing to think about is actually there's not much that should really change just because you're using AI to deliver your product, especially when you're explaining the product for maybe the first time or you're having early conversations with investors. What I would say is focus on the use case, focus on what the product does for the target user and why it is a differentiated experience, right? And if the investor or the investor wants to go deeper into how the AI works, that's good. You should have your backup on how the system works and what you've built into that AI system that makes it unique or differentiated from something that might be generally available or off the shelf. But I think to start a conversation with investors, very much focusing on what the product does, how it will solve a problem for practitioners or for users that you're targeting with that product, and maybe how that product then creates value for those target users.
I'll just build on that. I think as an institutional investor, where on average people put in $5 to $10 million, especially if you're raising your first institutional check. I think having clarity is really important. There are hundreds of companies out there, and I walked around, and just having that really directly, what exactly are you building? Very straightforward clarity, so that your investor can understand essentially within first 2 minutes, if they are in the field investing, they have heard all the pitches, they have seen all the stats. So it's really about that clarity, and figure out how do you convey that clarity is really, really important.
Probably more for the non-lawyers.
Sure. Our perspective when we're working with entrepreneurs, by the way, who here is an AI entrepreneur fundraising? Okay.
Woo.
So, what we say in our programs is no pitch should really be product or tech led. Investors respond to pressure in the form of momentum. So when you're going out with a pitch, your product is never going to do that for you. Your traction is. So you want to get to a traction statement of some kind. Who's using this? How do you know that it's different? How do you know that they like it in a different way? Much more compelling position.
Fantastic. Aaron? Any point from the legal perspective?
From a legal perspective, I think what everyone said is right. We want clarity not just in terms of how you pitch and portray your business, but there are questions, and we'll talk about this in a bit. I think if it's investors are asking, what are you doing with your technology?
Exactly.
Having clarity in that regard is really important as well. I've seen several financing transactions have some bumps in the road because companies could not clearly state their thesis with respect to how they're building their product, how they're using data.
Yeah.
And that's really fundamental if you want the investors to open the checkbook.
Absolutely. So I heard a couple of points: having clarity and also having a proven market fit, or having some kind of traction, right? And sorry, I'm looking into my phone. I'm just checking some of my questions, not checking my chat GPT. But then, let's talk a little bit about, and we talked about that's how you evaluate from an investor perspective. But is there some kind of a data-driven reasoning that you're looking for? Are you also looking for the story of the investor, of the founder, of why they have come up with the solution? Does some kind of emotional appeal matter, or it's more market fit, revenue generation? Where's the balance? How do you evaluate when you look at it the first time? Yeah.
That's a great question. So we evaluate companies across a variety of different criteria. I think we would start generally with is the market appealing and interesting, or is there some catalyst for change that means there's a good enough likelihood that a really big company could be built in this market. We look at the founders and the team. Are they well suited to build a company in that market? We look at the product, of course, right? Is the product differentiated? Are there unique sources of data? Particularly for AI companies, we like to look for products that have access to or are able to generate differentiated or unique or hard to replicate types of data. And then of course, we look for momentum and traction, and are the teams delivering on the KPIs that they've said they are going to deliver on, and does that give us confidence or conviction that they'll continue to do that? And revenues are favored, sales and revenues are favored, but if you're earlier stage, there are definitely development milestones. There is product shipping velocity, right? And your ability to kind of adapt and move in the market is super important. So there's a variety of different metrics that we like to look at. So those are some of sort of criteria that we kind of try to box things into when we kind of first are introduced to a company and kind of get a cursory understanding of are we a good investor for this company? Can we actually be helpful? And obviously we go deeper from there, but that's kind of some general framing for how we kind of initially kind of filter through companies.
Yeah, I think ultimately investors look for everything to be able to underwrite something. And since we're at the AI Summit, talk about AI companies. So just to give you an example, last week I heard 5 companies talking about building agentic system, building agents. And if you know your investor, you know sort of their level of understanding or the question they will ask. And so typically in that scenario, the first question I'll ask is, how do you define agent? And I got 5 different answers, which is fine. I think now, $24 billion have been invested in Gen AI in the last 2 years. You have thousands and thousands of companies. You're competing against companies really getting maybe the same level of funding going forward, maybe slightly different level of funding going forward, depending on where the market is and how the first tranche of the companies will perform over time. So I think really, as I said before, really be clear about where exactly you're fitting the stack and why you're calling this an agent. What sort of task is it doing? Why is it different from just a model build performing tasks versus calling it an agentic system? Actually be more specific, because I think now the investors have seen enough, and I have more of a technical background, so the generic pitch can only get you so far. Now it's really kind of looking at what you're doing and look at what are we doing with a model that's different? How are we protecting our data? How are we using our data? Can we use the data? What are the value we're adding? And why is the problem the right problem to solve? And I think in the early stage, you don't have numbers, right? So, it's really hard to sell into JP Morgan, but there needs to be some kind of signal. You can define what that signal is. Like, I want to see signal that you're doing something that's pushing that forward, that adoption forward. Are you talking to the right people? Are you showing the demos? Are you rolling out pilots? Because I know the people, right? So, again, you need to know your audience. And so you want to find different kinds of signal that show that, hey, I'm really pushing the boundary as it relates to enterprise adoption. Consumer is a little bit different, but on the early stage enterprise AI adoption, you really want to think about how do you push that boundary.
Yeah, again, we'll defer to the investors and the companies that I work with in the, as the ultimate arbiters there. But I'll tell you what I see a lot of what Joyce is saying. I think we're past the point where companies can, just build on a promise essentially, and talk about what they're doing and how they're iterating. I think what I'm seeing with a lot of clients I'm working with is the need to scale their business, and I've seen more, say, pilot proof of concept type deals that I've worked on in the AI space over the past few months than I've ever done in my career in any other space. And I think that's coming from a place where there's a real push to show that there's a tangible use case for the AI tools that the clients I work with are building. But I think the other side of it is there are a lot of companies out there that are really excited to try these tools as well. And there's a lot of interest, especially for a lower risk proof of concept pilot type deal for even bigger companies. I've been working opposite a couple pretty conservative banks that my clients are selling into with some early stage deals that I don't think I would have seen those kinds of deals in the pre-Gen AI world as much as I'm seeing it now.
I mean, I think we have, as an accelerator, kind of a unique position because we need to come from the investor perspective and also evangelize for the founder. And so where we land is the investors should have a clear way that they're going to unlock a market for you. Like the check is their seat at the table, and then their network resources or their expertise or something else is going to be what helps pile onto the progress that you have. So I would just advise founders that when they are talking to an investor about what their thesis is and how they help the investor meet that thesis, to find out how the investor is going to participate with their resources.
So, great points. Now let's get into more of the technicality and Aaron's favorite area of how we go through the legality. So, what do you think the diligence looks like from the investor perspective? What do the companies look for when they are evaluating a solution? Not only from the market fit, the revenue, but also is it fitting compliance requirements? Is it following responsible AI guidelines? Is it following all kinds of frameworks that we have to make sure we are developing more ethically and making sure that our data is protected? And what are some of the common red flags that you can definitely identify from the first pitch that all investors, all founders must avoid when they're going to talk to you guys? You can start. Yes, this is your your spotlight.
I think it's interesting because I think we're now at the point where there's investors, like everyone, attorneys even, didn't really know what to ask maybe a year, 2 years ago in terms of how companies were not just building, but also, just as importantly, using AI technology. We're now at the point where I think there's a pretty standard set of themes that we're seeing. And a lot depends on what type of company an investor is investing into, whether you're in the infrastructure layer, whether you're in the application layer. I think there are more companies in the application layer that are building, whether you're fine-tuning a model or whether you're, putting just a wrapper around a frontier model. And the questions in that realm have less to do about the hugely weighty issues that you might want to ask of, the OpenAIs and Anthropics of the world as to, how you are fundamentally building your models. But there are still questions about what type of, what we talked about, unique data sets, for instance, is driving value of companies. Investors want to know what data sets you are ingesting and incorporating into your tool. Where did you get that from? There are, for better or for worse, real copyright questions right now about, and the legal world is unsettled at this point. There's a lot of, cases that are proceeding very slowly. Where maybe in a year or two we'll have some more answers as to whether, if you're scraping data from publicly available sites, are you totally fine with that? You scot-free, you're fine, or are there some real risks? I'd say that the majority of companies that we see are doing a lot of data scraping in some way, and there's some safety in numbers, but it's something that investors want to ask about, and whether they're companies are doing it in a responsible way. Very similarly, what you're doing with the data that your customers are inputting into your platforms. Data leakage has been a big headline question from day one of from the release of GPT 3.0, essentially, when this became headline news. And I think now most companies are aware of this issue and know that if they're selling into the enterprise space, most of their customers are not going to want their data to be used for training purposes, or if so, that it's done under very, very limited circumstances. There's questions about then what happens with the output. Does the customer own that? What rights does the purveyor of the tool have? And then finally, there's sort of the reliability world, which is, are you putting in any guardrails with respect to hallucinations and bias? A lot depends on what area you're in. There are much higher risk areas and lower risk areas. I think we'll talk about that in a second. I'm happy to kind of be quiet for a second and take that later. But a lot depends on what industry you're in as well. If you're in a world where you are creating a tool that helps companies make hiring decisions or medical decisions, there's going to be a lot more scrutiny on your output than, say, kind of a non-industry specific ideation tool or something like that.
Absolutely. Joe? Lovely. I love this. So let's get into now a little bit more, technical advice. Would you be able to guide our audience? How do they go about doing this storytelling around their matrix, their goals? What are some of the ways to kind of iteratively show progress? If you are like a new startup, or even if you are like a mid-level startup, iteratively showing progress is very, very crucial. And how do you usually see storytelling being one of the key components? Because I have seen, and I'm very inexperienced, but I've seen in some of the cases where a good story sells, even if the product is not right up there, it's not serving the best or best accuracy matrix, the cause and the back end process of saying that how the product was developed or how it has reached its potential has a lot of effect as well. What do you see in the market? Does that usually serve your experience as well? Joe?
Sure. I think at least for me, so post-COVID, a lot of the first meetings on Zoom, and that's how we screen, because we'll get a lot of inbound. So I think the first meeting, you want to be able to have your elevator pitch about yourself, pretty crisp, and why you're doing this, and why you're the right person, why you and your team have the right knowledge or this expertise to solve this particular problem. It could be you have expertise on the domain side, the data science AI domain side, or you have expertise on the industrial vertical side. It has to be clear. Now I think it's very hard for journalists, unless you're an AI researcher, to build something extremely valuable. And so we're looking for, first in that meeting, you want to convey who you are and why you're the right person, right team, and what sort of expertise you have, because ultimately building AI solutions is about representing knowledge, right? Understanding knowledge. So you need to have some sort of expertise. For me, I think the first meeting, not really storytelling, but what exactly is the problem you're solving? And why do you think that's the right problem to solve now or in the near term, or there is a potential that there is going to be a real need? And that obviously connects to your understanding or your perspective about the problem and the problem space. So it's all connected. So I'm looking for that, not really pitching, but just a conversation as to, am I tracking? Do I really understand? I'm trying to understand what you're pitching. And the third thing I'm really looking for, related to the problem, is this ability to connect the technical approach to the solution to this problem. So, we can't just throw we're doing machine learning, so it's about, there are problems that are appropriate using traditional machine learning, and there are problems more appropriate using Gen AI. And so not everything's Gen AI, not everything's traditional machine learning. Some is something totally different. It doesn't have to be an ML company or AI company. So the ability to be able to, as I started talking about clarity, that's the bridge I'm looking for. Is why are you using these approaches at this juncture, given the resources you have, to solve this particular problem or set of problems that you have expertise in? And if those three things are clear, then we'll move forward to talking about traction, what things the company has done, how can it add value. But if those three things are not clear, I think it's hard for us to move from the first meeting.
Yeah, that was great. A couple things I would add. Like, to me, telling a story is super important for how you position yourselves and how you position the business in the market and how you familiarize yourself with a potential investor. But the most important things you can communicate in your dialogues with investors are, being very, very transparent about what you're doing, where you're experiencing success, where you've had to pivot or experience some failures, and then ultimately do what you say you're going to do and show your track record of having done what you have said that you're going to do. I think that's the single most important thing that helps investors get to conviction, right? If you can build that credibility by demonstrating real progress on a roadmap. It doesn't have to be sales, it doesn't have to be financial metrics, it can be development based milestones, but say you can show with prior investor communications where we said for the last 12 months here's what we communicated, here's what we've delivered over that time period, and then the question really just becomes, are you focused on the right things in the period that you're focused on going forward? And as an investor and looking at a company, we might not necessarily think that those are the right things, but then it's not a good fit for an investor. But if you sort of fundamentally agree that you guys are building in the right space, doing the right things, having the right targets, and you have the credibility of having delivered on what you've said you're going to deliver in the past, it's a really good recipe for building that conviction.
I'm going to build on Joe's comment there about telling them what you're going to tell them what you told them. When you're telling the story of your pitch, it's not just what comes out of your mouth in a slide deck or in a discussion. The story that you're telling is in the relationship you have with the investor. And that story begins at the first meeting that Joyce described, right? But then you've got to show them, regardless of what you do next, I'm going to be making progress. And this is your opportunity to follow along, right? So in that first meeting, you want to make sure that you answer Joyce's questions about, why you're special and why your tech is good and, where your traction is at. But then you also want to make it clear, super clear, where you're going to go, and then make it impossible for her not to see that and follow up by following up in email, on social media, on whatever. The other thing that I want to say about storytelling, especially when it comes to giving the investor what they need to cut a check, the investor's ultimate fear is that they have to explain to their investment board in 18 months why they didn't invest in it. Right? Like if they miss a deal, that's their biggest L. So you want to optimize for making them feel like they're about to have that conversation with their board, right? And that the way that you do that is by creating this relationship of progress and momentum.
That's perfect. I would like to also address the don'ts. We talked about the do's, that's amazing, like what should you do, but what should you absolutely not do? And that would be like a biggest investor turnoff if you are speaking to the founders the first time. Any short, crisp, feelings that you have had, experiences, and then that can guide our audience here.
Yeah, I can start. So I think one advice I would give is that I think oftentimes, and I understand this, is that entrepreneurs think that what you have in the deck, right, and your idea is like top secret.
Yeah.
And you go into the first meeting, it's typically 30 minutes, sometimes a bit longer, but typically in the first 10 minutes, there is a sense, if the investor's experience, there is a sense whether or not there's something here. I don't necessarily know what exactly here, but I know there's something here. Because it's pattern recognition, I've done look at thousands of things, have learned from lessons and failures and success, and this is a craft. And so, some entrepreneurs come sort of kind of cagey about what they want to share. And you ask very direct questions like, well, we don't really talk about that until the second meeting. Or they are not transparent about their fundraising timeline, right? They come back a week later and say, oh, actually, we already got a term sheet. Then why are you talking to me the week before? If I'm a lead investor and I need at least a couple of weeks to get things together. To your point about relationship building trust, those are first impressions. Like we're all trying to look for great entrepreneurs and companies. We also have to work and underwrite these deals. We have our fiduciary duties, and we want to back really great companies. And so I think when the entrepreneurs make it harder for the investor to evaluate, you want to think about how to make it easier. How do you naturally follow up so we get push information, right? Because we're tracking regardless. So I think the number one advice I would give is that, especially I see this in somewhat inexperienced entrepreneurs, is trying to really hold a lot of stuff back. There's a lot of information out there that I can find out. So there isn't much that is like secret. Unless we get to confirmatory due diligence. So I think being open, being transparent, just answer the question directly is really important.
Yeah, completely agree. Completely agree. And I think just to kind of link some of the two comments that were just made, the biggest fear that I have as an investor is actually not missing a deal. It's actually investing in a deal when I have the facts wrong, right? That is what is where I put my reputation on the line. And if I'm just wrong about the facts of the case or what, some of the fundamentals of the company, that is where I will be in a lot of trouble, right? So, I don't think it's ever a good situation where you get an investor to kind of want to invest based on this, kind of rose-tinted view of what the company is or could be. That usually doesn't lead to a good situation. There's no harm in being transparent in my mind with investors. If an investor says no, then they're not the right investor. But as long as you've been transparent and are forthcoming with the current state of the business, it's better for you to do that. You'll find the right investor, right? If you find an investor that when you're completely transparent with them and they have complete understanding of what your business is and where you're focused on, what you've been able to achieve, and they can't get to conviction on the investment, that's actually a good result. The idea is to actually do that faster, right? You want to do that as fast as possible. And kind of funnel them out of the funnel and find the investors that are your people that are going to have conviction in what you're doing and are going to be accepting of where you're at from a life cycle standpoint.
Aaron probably has a really good idea of what would stop a deal in its tracks.
Yeah, I mean,
Aaron.
there are a lot of horror stories with all the stuff that we were talking about in terms of compliance, where companies just aren't paying attention to that at all. You see companies that are playing fast and loose with data, and I guess it's interesting to Joe's point that sometimes the investor just has no idea about this until the financing diligence exercise. They haven't been upfront about it in their initial pitches, which is
Shady.
that's a red flag, a yellow flag at the very least. And I think what a company generally shouldn't be in a position of is where we're representing the investor in a deal. We put together a diligence report that raises a lot of flags. That, by the way, flags aren't necessarily bad because investors like risk, and we like companies that like risk. But when you're not being forthcoming about that, that's another story altogether.
Yeah, but put the liability on them. Like we were working with one venture fund to make an accelerator, and just brought in this cohort. We discovered inside the cohort that one of the companies purchased the company from original founders. And they didn't talk about that in diligence, right?
Wow.
All that needed to be they didn't need to make a big deal about that in the deck, but it should have been in the diligence documents. And now that relationship's in a rocky place, right? The other thing that I would have you walk away with, founders, is when you have that feeling of, I don't want to share this, this is important for us, just think how is that secret working for you right now? If that secret was really important, wouldn't you already have the customers and the investors that you wanted?
Absolutely love it. Yes,
I was
please.
just going to say very quickly, sometimes companies come to me and say, do you think I can get this investor to sign an NDA before I pitch them? And once in a while investors do sign NDAs, but most of the time they don't. And really what we tell them is if you're talking to a reputable investor, they wouldn't be in that business.
Absolutely.
If they were going to take your ideas and then pitch it to another person they wanted to accelerate a company with. This is a relationships world, and there would be a lot of bridges burned if that's what investors did. And usually that gives founders a little more comfort to be forthcoming, as they know they need to be in order to progress in an investment process.
Amazing. So yeah, relationships before transactions. Good, takeaway. So I'm gonna spend maybe 5 minutes talking a little bit about, the fast-pacing environment, the tech world that's moving. How do you guys keep up with it? Like, every day there's a new model, a technique, some multimodal behavior that's coming up that I'm sure some AI company will try to leverage and build a product on top of it. So how are the investors, the legal teams, the corporations keeping up with the huge AI boom and technology boom? And what do you think about that? What's your strategy of being on top of it?
Yeah. I mean, the reality is, if you try and focus on too many different areas, the pace of progression is just too rapid, I think, to be effective across all those different areas. So the way at least I try and keep up with things, I focus on areas that I have some sort of either information advantage or experience advantage, or where my pattern recognition works really well. So it's being focused on specific markets, being focused on specific types of technology, and going deep in those areas. Continuing to kind of add to my expertise in kind of domain knowledge, and then kind of, if we have to go outside of those lanes, kind of relying on the depth that you have in the areas that you do have it, to try and kind of transfer that learning onto other areas. So I mean, there's just so much research, so much data, so many newsletters and companies being formed. I think you got to pick your lanes, go deep in those lanes, and then kind of rely on that depth to kind of go across where you can.
I mean, I try to read as much as I can. I feel like I'm just reading all the time. I'm reading research papers, I'm reading news, I'm reading about startups that come out every day that are raising money at different stages. And for me, that's the way to sort of de-bias myself and to be able to really just understand what is state of art, as well as what are the things that people are building.
Go ahead.
I would double down on what are the things that people are building there. Your network is moving faster than any periodical, than any accredited knowledge, than any patent, than any tech. What people are building is what's furthest ahead. So put yourself in a position to be listening to what people are building around you. And if you're not investing time in having that network, then you're missing out on the most important intelligence source that you could possibly have as a founder.
I know we have a lot of founders here, and we have 5 minutes for questions. 1 minute of your time to understand a little bit about the woman founder scenarios. I read some reports where we see that sometimes it's hard to get funding if you are a woman leading a startup. I'm not sure how correct that is. You guys are at the spot doing the decisions. Have you seen similar kind of issues, some kind of biases? What can some of these folks do to propel themselves up? Any guidance, any tidbits, anything?
I can comment.
Yes.
I think investors are ultimately trying to find the best companies and best founders. And there are a lot of problems that need to be solved. If you look across the world, and not everybody knows how to solve every problem. And we're looking for that diversification. I think that's actually very important now in investing in the space. And I think in part, we have fewer women entrepreneurs, and that contributes to limited experience. And I see that in pitching. I see that in first meeting, how to answer investor questions. And for women founders in the room, I think to the extent that you can pitch to a lot of friendlies across different backgrounds and have people give you feedback, I think that's really helpful. But investors are looking for best entrepreneurs at the end of the day.
Pitch more, get more exposure, get more experience, and that's how. Okay, great. So let's open up the room for questions. I think we have one here.